Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with my High Elf unit tier list for Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. And I'll be blunt, this tier list is a joke. People did ask me to do this since I've been doing tier lists for various races. But I think it's a complete joke to do this tier list because there are 4 units available for the High Elves that are S tier and everything else is F tier in comparison to them. But let's try and take it a bit more seriously than that. But I'll explain why everything besides 4 units is completely pointless in the High Elven roster. So, first off, we start with Spearmen and Silvern Guard. Effectively the same unit. The Silvern Guard are a more expensive but more powerful version of the Spearmen. That's the role. They are recruited from the principal High Elf barracks. Spearmen are recruited from every single settlement. They're both excellent line holders. These guys just have more armor, more damage dealing capability, just overall better stats. They're also a DLC unit. But even regular spearmen, they're amazing line holders against anything. You can throw Chosen against these guys and they'll hold the line decently well. Not necessarily so great in auto-resolve, especially because of the High Elf army compositions, but you can easily replace these guys. You may not so easily replace Silvern Guard, but realistically, by the time you can even recruit Silvern Guard, your economy should be in such a state you can recruit whatever you want. But even then, you probably will still want to just spam Spearmen, Silvern Guard, and Archers. But yeah, great line holders, great leadership, have a bunch of combat buffs at the beginning of combat when it's most important. That's the de facto High Elf rule. So just great situation overall, very affordable, very easy to spam. Then we have Archers with light armor, S tier unit as well. Some people will disagree with this a bit, but compared to Archers without light armor, which are in effect the exact same unit, which I'll put them on A tier, still a great unit, still worth recruiting. But generally, if I'm playing a High Elf campaign, I'll just recruit Archers with light armor versus Archers without light armor. The cost difference is minimal between them. It's not worth considering the kind of cost difference. The durability, like in actual battles, it may not matter until it does. Like there are some situations where you just want more durability for a range unit. It's also a question of auto-resolve. So overall, like I'd say Archers of light armor are S tier and Archers without light armor are an A tier unit, though they're recruitable without even a barracks. So what I'm trying to say about High Elves, you have 2 amazing units that you can recruit from any single settlement that you can use throughout the entire campaign. And if you do get a basic barracks, you get 2 other units that you can use throughout the course of the campaign. So every High Elf recruitment building in the game is completely pointless for the purpose of actually recruiting units. Artillery to some extent, but you're probably better off if you're looking to get artillery to rely on allies in order to get it. Then we have Y lines of Crix. You know, I really want to like these guys in quite a few ways because they should be a decent enough melee unit, decent enough armor, decent enough damage dealing capability, decent enough leadership. But their actual combat performance when you're fighting them or you're fighting with them is never really that great. Like, it is a unit that looks better than it actually is. Like, if you were to look at the stats of these, you know, doesn't seem like that bad compared to, say, Armor Cossars or Empire Greatswords. Well, they're kind of worse than Empire Greatswords, really, in quite a few ways. And also, they're quite squishy, weirdly enough. Like, Spearmen will generally take less damage than these guys, even despite the armor difference. It just goes to show that armor is not the be-all and end-all, and it should probably not be considered the most important thing in auto-resolve. But even with that consideration, these guys actually end up taking more damage in auto-resolve than Spearmen. So just a really weird unit that underperforms in every way. It underperforms on the campaign map, and underperforms in battles. Even with Alistair, even who gives a bunch of benefits to White Lions, it's still not worth recruiting these guys for his army. Like, it's worth using him as a legendary lord because he's pretty decent, but not necessarily with a stack of White Lions, really. Rangers, also an F tier unit. To explain this, think of a worse unit that's roughly equivalent to Hobgoblin Cutthroats. And even then, it might just be worse. Then consider a race that has access to these guys at the top over here. These guys, at tier 1. And these are a tier 1 unit. they're absolutely worthless to recruit. Their damage dealing capability is not great for dual wield infantry that's dedicated at fighting enemy infantry. They'll do them more damage than Spearmen. They'll also die a lot quicker than Spearmen. They're far worse in every conceivable way. They're worse in auto-resolve. They require building to recruit, unlike regular Spearmen. Though granted, it's the same building you get archers or light armor, but still. Their combat capability is not justified. Their upkeep is not justified. Their auto-resolve is not justified. So yeah, not worth ever getting these guys at all. Then we have Phoenix Guard. Where to put them? So you have a high tier infantry unit. That is redundant because you have plenty of good infantry units as well. So, do you know what High Elves don't need? An anti-large unit. Do you know what they get? An anti-large unit. For what it's worth, they're pretty good against cavalry, but they're worse in most situations than Silvering Guard. In fact, I would dare say that it's better to actually get more units of spearmen in various armies or recruit an entire army, or recruit several armies of spearmen than recruiting an entire army of Phoenix Guard. There's very few situations where you're looking at a campaign map and thinking to yourself, damn, I wish I had Phoenix Guard. Not a bad unit. Far from it. They're unbreakable, they do a decent amount of damage, but the lack of shields does hurt them. Weirdly enough, it also hurts them on auto-resolve. You might think them being unbreakable is a benefit, but it's actually a loss, because when your units are about to die, partly because of High Elven leadership is being so high, so that when units do rout, other units do rout, it's generally because they're about to die. You don't want your units to be completely wiped out. You want to survive, replenish, all that. That's the problem with Phoenix Guard. Combine that with their tier requirement, just not a great situation with these guys, in general. Just annoying to recruit, annoying to get access to them, not worth it whatsoever, even when you have them. Then you have Sword Masters of Hoeth. I'd say Sword Masters of Hoeth are a C tier unit. They're a good two-handed infantry unit that's roughly equivalent to Great Swords, actually better than Great Swords. So if you're looking for that kind of armor-piercing melee damage capability, these guys are worth getting, but again, kind of redundant in a lot of situations, but they're not so annoying to recruit compared to, Phoenix Guard. They're a tier lower. Still pretty annoying, still questionable value in quite a few situations. Look, as I said at the beginning, I have put every other unit in F tier, and I'd have good reason to do so with the High Elves. Just gonna point that out, so just saying. Lauder and Seaguard, I'm going to say flat out that Lauder and Seaguard, regular Lauder and Seaguard, are an F tier unit. Flat not worth recruiting. Like, if you're recruiting anything in these guys, like, they're this hybrid unit that can both do melee and shoot at the same time. Okay, all well and good with respect to that. Fair enough. But value-wise, cost-wise, well, okay, first off, they're not as good line holders as Spearmen are. They're not as good damage dealers as High Elf archers are, so what's the value in getting them? Especially when you can get Lauder and Sea Guards with shields, which, if you're looking for that kind of hybrid unit melee capability instead of recruiting Spearmen or Silvering Guard, you might want to look at Lauder and Sea Guard. From my point of view, the cost you're paying for getting these guys and the loss of combat capability in that specialization of either melee or range is just not worth paying with these guys. However, on the flip side, you might end up with armies that do somewhat better in auto-resolve. Then again, given High Elf global recruitment benefits and the situation you have once you move from your core territories, it's very easy to recruit a bunch of Spearmen and Silvering Guards in your frontline army. So even if you lose all of them in all your frontline armies, it's very easy to replace them, very cheap to replace them. So I kind of find them redundant, but yeah, the shield, it's literally the same unit, but the shield makes a difference. It makes them better in battle, it makes them better auto-resolve, just that kind of situation. Shadow Warriors, technically they're a better archer, right? Technically. They're recruiting from the same building. So you might say, well, why not recruit Shadow Warriors? Because their combat capability is not greater than archers with light armor. They're more expensive. Oh, they can be a skirmish infantry unit. Okay, that is not worth it for the High Elves in a lot of situations. A couple of situations, sure, but there's weaknesses that come with that. To be quite blunt about it, you're only recruiting them for fluff purposes, not because they're useful in any way, shape, or form, from my perspective. Like, if you're looking at range capability, there is a better unit to provide you more range capability. If you're looking at skirmishing capability, you kind of don't need that for the High Elves, given the enemies they're dealing with. Like, consider what High Elves are dealing with. They're dealing with Dark Elves. They're dealing with Slaanesh. They're dealing with enemies that have greater mobility in general on the battlefield. So their battle plan usually is to form a very strong static line, ranged and melee, on a certain sections of battlefield and hold the line. Having a couple of units that are not even that fast to begin with, that have that skirmishing capability, is not great. Unless you're playing a Leafanar. But even with a Leafanar, it's only for his army you might recruit these. And for his army, you have Shadow Walkers, which I'm tempted to not add to this tier list. But yeah, they're kind of occupying the same level. But generic unit campaign list, you can only get these in a Leafanar's campaign, so I do feel it's pretty pointless for me to add them on the tier list. They're exclusive to him. On the flip side, however, a Leafanar... okay, so that's one reason I would not add them. But on the flip side, unlike Elfarian, who has limited units only available if you're playing his campaign, you can recruit as many of these as you want. They're better than Shadow Warriors, but yeah, overall they're roughly the same tiers as Shadow Warriors. They take longer to recruit, have greater combat capability in general. But even when you're playing a Leafanar, you kind of only want to recruit these in a Leafanar's army. Again, he is the only one that makes that playstyle work. And it's the upkeep benefit that he has that makes it work, by the way. Because otherwise, it would not be cost effective. Leafanar makes it cost effective, but only for his army. So, just worth pointing out. Sisters of Avalorn. If we're talking about Alariel, they're an S tier unit because you can... or if you get Alariel, they can be an S tier unit. But I would say, like, realistically, only if you're playing an Alariel, they're an S tier unit. Otherwise, if you have Alariel, they can be an A tier unit. But generally speaking, I would put them as a B tier unit. They have greater range combat capability, which may be a bit redundant. But the reason I specify with the Alariel situation, Alariel can get these as tier 3. That's why they're excellent, and she has a really strong economy. High Elves have a strong economy. So it's worth recruiting in that campaign. She can also recruit them in one turn. Well, skill line. But all the same, the problem in other High Elf campaigns, you can only get these as tier 4. And they're a bit annoying to recruit. By the time you get to tier 4 settlement, you have other priorities in your campaign in terms of like what you're dealing with. You may have a wider area of territory, so you're looking at situations of having mass as opposed to quality in terms of the armies you have. And the enemies you're dealing with, like, between getting a sister's army as opposed to getting 2 armies with High Elven light archers, I'd rather go for the 2 armies with light archers. That is the kind of decision making you have to make. However, if you do need that extra range capability, they can be great. They can be good against demons. They're your endgame archer unit. But most of the time, I just find them redundant. They have the combat capability, but it just feels, again, redundant from my point of view. Illyrian Reavers, yeah, F tier unit. Cheap ass Shaw Cavalry that doesn't have a great deal of durability. Has some decent level of speed, but there's units that can catch up to them. Doesn't have any melee stand-up capability. Will take a good amount of damage. Yeah, not worth recruiting whatsoever. Chariots. F tier. Chariots in general in the game are pretty bad. They get stuck in. They have pathfinding issues. Unless it's a specific type of chariot that can do a good amount of damage, have a certain level of durability, chariots in general are not worth recruiting. And that does apply to these chariots as well. There is a chariot unit that is worth recruiting, but yeah, you look at these 2 chariot versions for the High Elves, the cheaper versions, both regular High Elven chariots, FLMR chariots, whatever, they're not worth recruiting in a High Elven campaign. If you want a chariot in a High Elf campaign, there is a much better choice available in that campaign, and that's White Lion Chariot. See, White Lion Chariots, they may be a bit annoying as a unit to recruit, to be sure. Absolutely. But consider the capability it offers you as a unit. It's a fast-moving, pretty durable, strong flanker. that can hold its own decently well in melee as well. It's not war sled. It's not heavy war sleds. You're not Kislev. You have lions, not bears. But it's a pretty solid unit all the same. And unlike the Sisters versus Light Archer armor situation, it's not redundant. It provides a capability you will not get elsewhere. This is the reason other chariot units are not worth getting in a High Elf campaign, because you have this option that is just flat out better than others. It's more expensive, it takes longer to recruit, okay. But it's one thing to have a unit that takes multiple turns to recruit and you want to mass. Sisters are kind of that unit. Shadow Walkers are kind of that unit. But it's a different thing if you're just looking to get maybe 2-4 units in every army for that kind of specialist role. That is a different dynamic, creates a different situation for the player to deal with. Then we have Silver Helms without shield, F tier units. Silver Helms with shields, C tier unit. Now, they're the exact same unit, shield versus not shield. The unshielded version, what's the damn point in recruiting them? Ever. At any point. Like, even if you're not dealing with massive range units, you might be surprised, but I do find that the shielded versions of units tend to do better in general than the unshielded version. So what's the actual value proposition in recruiting Silver Helms without shield? Then there's the question of what's the value proposition in recruiting Silver Helms, and the answer to that is almost squat. If you want a fast-moving flanker unit, I would firmly recommend not... Like, this is the problem with the Silver Helms in general. In as far as cavalry units go, they can be decent. They have some issues, some bugs and all that, but if you're looking for a cavalry option, it can be decent enough. So they're not completely worthless. That's why they avoid the F tier. But they're very close to that. Because High Elf economy depends on a combination of buildings, right? You need a control building, you need an economic building, then you want a growth building, then you want a trade tariff building, then you want an elven court. You get the idea. A lot of your building slots are occupied by different structures. And the building chain that you get Silver Helms from, you only get it for Illyrian Reavers and Silver Helms. Like, you get it for very basic cavalry units. There's better cavalry options available for the High Elves. If you want skirmishing capability, there's choices for that. Like, if you're talking about the Ifilmar Smithy, where you get chariots and artillery, yeah, that's a building worth getting. The stables for the High Elves, completely pointless. The only reason you'll get Silver Helms in a campaign, realistically, is because you either start with them or because you get them for Confederation. Then you have Illyrian Reavers. One of these, and I emphasize just the one, can be useful a bit to skirmish with the enemy, but they're not great skirmishers, but it can be a way to draw an enemy into your prepared position if they're not willing to attack you. However, it should be pointed out that you're dealing with enemies that may be faster than these guys. They have decent enough skirmishing capability, but if you're looking to harass their enemy to get them to attack your lines, do you know why elves have a Mage Lord, which are worth recruiting quite a few ways? Getting magic can be a bit tricky, but you have lords that are on flying mounts, and heroes that are on flying mount, nobles. So if you're looking to harass the enemy to get them to attack you, there's other ways of doing so as the High Elves. So a bit redundant, but, you know, maybe 1 or 2 per army for that kind of capability, but that's about it. The Dragon Riders of Calidor. Really, Dragon Cavalry without the dragon. In as far as cavalry goes for the High Elves, these are the best option. Do you need them? Well, not quite. See, their combat capability is not bad. But you have the Y Alliance. And the thing about Y Alliance is the number of units, the number of models, rather, in a unit. That makes them so good. So they can get in and out, get stuck in, get out. That's the value of them. So if you're looking for that kind of cavalry unit, these guys are the ones you want to recruit. So, the Dragon Riders without the dragon, not really worth getting in a High Elf campaign, I would say. Imric has an easier access to these, but I generally find that if I'm looking for a flanking unit, there's better options in a High Elf campaign, be it chariots or flying units. And I generally have other priorities. Eagles, yeah, F tier unit. Horrible single entity unit, doesn't do a great job in combat, not a good fighter, not a good flanker, Not good at anything. What's the damn point of this unit? I have no idea. But yeah, the Eagles are terrible. I don't need to say anything more like that. Actual White Lions. Fast-moving Flesh Hounds of the High Elves. Terrible unit, not worth recruiting. Not enough damage. Decent enough speed. Can do a decent amount of damage for what they are, but they'll die very quickly, and what they are offering doesn't mesh well with the High Elven playstyle. Like, this is the thing about White Lion Chariots. They do mesh well with the High Elven playstyle, but these guys, the regular White Lions, without a unit attached to them, just not worth it. Phoenixes, 3 different versions. Flamespires, Arcane Phoenix, and the blue one. Whatever. Some of these names can be weird. But yeah, you have 3 different versions of Phoenixes. The Arcane Phoenix, I would say, is an A-tier unit. This is your flying flanker unit. The Flamespire Phoenix and the Blue Phoenix, I know it has a name, I forgot it. Frostfire, something like that. It should give you an idea of how much I care about using Phoenixes in a High Elven campaign. And by the way, I've played High Elves out of the Warhammer 2 races, probably the most out of those races that were introduced in Warhammer 2. The reason you don't care necessarily about Phoenix... Okay, so the Flamespire Phoenix, and that's the reason I know its name, it's useful because you can throw the combat situation in my revive. The blue one, doesn't necessarily have that... doesn't have the revive function, but it does have some better combat capability. But generally speaking, I would say recruiting Phoenixes in a campaign, questionable value. The only reason I'm not putting them lower is you would still want the structure, if only for the Arcane Phoenix, because that is a good unit. Like, the amount of damage this thing can do in an AoE is ridiculous. So blob the enemy up, blow them up with an Arcane Phoenix, great. But these two, not necessarily worth so much. So then we have Sun Dragons, Moon Dragons, Star Dragons. Okay, the various dragons of the High Elves. Here's my perspective on dragons. They're all C tier. Not because they're terrible, but because they're bloody expensive. If I want a flying unit, my lords can get dragons as a mount, and they're worth getting, including Star Dragons. 2, Sun Dragons, the easiest one to acquire, are not necessarily that great in combat. Moon Dragons and Star Dragons, they're good in combat, but they're expensive as hell, take a while to recruit, aren't necessarily worth it. Like, I would rather recruit an Arcane Phoenix. Even getting the building for these guys can be a bit iffy in a campaign, and by the time you do get it, like, I don't think it's worth getting it for Sun Dragons or Moon Dragons. For Star Dragons, different situation, because Star Dragons have a great deal of combat capability, to be sure. But this is the kind of same perspective I have as with Thunder Barges. A Thunder Barge with dwarves, a Star Dragon for the High Elves, is a great, fantastic unit on its own. What is the incentive in a campaign to recruit them? Do you need the combat capability? No. And if you do need the combat capability, you can get it from a lord if you really need a dragon. And a lord is going to be better at riding a dragon because they're items and skill line, right? So High Elf lords, the melee versions especially, but even archmages, pretty solid on dragon, they will be better at riding a dragon, right? I would rather have several armies of just lords in those armies, pay the supply line cost, than recruit any dragon in a High Elf campaign. They're not horrible. They can be worth recruiting for insane combat capability, but it's the same situation as Thunder Barges. Very high tier unit, and by the time you can recruit it, it's pointless to recruit because the way High Elves play their campaigns, they're weakest at the start, they get far stronger later on. So by the time you can recruit a dragon, you've long since won the campaign because your economy just spirals out of control and you make more money than anyone else. Something that Creative Assembly should be aware of with regards to rebalancing the High Elves if that's what they're going to do in the Sinnelleos DLC. Then we have the Bolt Throwers. Yeah, I'm going to put these guys... I'll say it. They're an F tier unit. So here's a couple of reasons why. They're inconvenient to get because they need a specific building. You probably will get that building because look, they're a needed unit. You can't just say, oh, I'm not going to get Bolt Throwers in a campaign. But they're utter trash. In terms of field battles, due to High Elven army playstyles, you might have issues getting them to fire. And they're not burst damage artillery unit. They're a sustained damage artillery unit. They can be great in prolonged combat situations, but the AI is, even on lower difficulty, not going to allow you to take advantage of that. But you're not getting these for the sake of situation of using them in field battles. You're getting them because you need them in fucking sieges. Until you realize you're better off freaking allying Bretonia. I'm not joking on what I'm saying here. You're better off literally allying Bretonia and hoping they can sell you trebuchets because those are better in the role of sieges. They'll actually do a lot more damage to walls. They'll do it quicker. Or you send someone to Mr. Karl France and you start buying fucking cannons, luminarcs, and Hellstorm rockets. So what is the value of a ballista? An elven bolt thrower? 0. Zilch. Or, sorry, Eagle Claw, whatever. But it's basically the equivalent of a bolt thrower for the dwarves or the greenskins. Like, for the greenskins, a goblin bolt thrower is worth it given their compositions of units and their overall artillery situation and recruitments. For elves, it's not useful at all. And it's interestingly enough to compare it, like, bolt throwers for goblins and dwarves are equally useless in sieges. They're not a great unit for sieges. The reason you get those units is because of anti-artillery capability, single entity capability, and accuracy. Well, guess what elves have? A bunch of highly accurate ranged units. They are easily available in a campaign. So completely pointless recruitment unit? Yes. You do need it. But just because you need it for a particular purpose, sieges, having siege attacker until your lords have siege attacker and then can throw bolt throwers all the way, or just being able to break walls does not make it a good unit. It's a completely pointless unit that is very easy to replace in allied recruitment. Completely pointless unit. And look, you can argue the same thing about Little Groms for Kislev, except Little Groms are actually capable in combat. If the Little Groms in a siege do a great freaking job. On the field of battle, they're pretty decently durable artillery unit that's led by, pulled by bears. Those bears are capable of killing Chaos Warriors. Just the difference in respect to that, I have no idea what Creative Assembly was thinking with regards to Elven artillery. It's equally bad with the Reaper Bolt Thrower for the Dark Elves. Though that's a kind of bit more useful in some ways, not quite. It's a bit more useful because Dark Elves don't have the same kind of range that High Elven Archers or Light Armor have. Different incentives of building an army or land. But yeah, Elven Eagle Claws, Elven Bolt Throwers, completely useless unit. Never worth recruiting in a campaign. By the way, as for heroes, just because some people ask me about it, yeah, they're all worth recruiting. Get as many of them. Generally, you want a mage, a noble, or rather, you generally want a casualty replenishment hero, a training hero, so, sword masters or lore masters, a mage, a casualty replenishment hero, and a training hero. Elves do lack hero capacity, though. Unless you can get that short campaign victory condition sorted out relatively quickly, unless you're abusing various things. So this is my perspective on the High Elf unit roster. Yeah, a lot of things that are in the trash tiers, to be sure. Some things that are better, but they are not worth it for most part in a campaign. Like, I would say obviously the SNA units are worth recruiting every single time. The units in B and C tier, they're not bad to recruit. I generally do recruit them in a campaign. Well, usually, right? Phoenix says it's kind of like, do I really want to? Not quite. I'm only putting them higher because you'll usually want the building anyway. If only to unlock research. Welcome to the High Elf campaign experience. It's a fun fucking experience, I gotta tell you. But you can get Phoenixes, you can use them. Dragons, you can use them all that. So these units like in B and C can be useful. Everything in DNF is just completely fluff, completely redundant. Or if it's important, needed, like the bolt throwers, you're just kind of like clenching your teeth when you're recruiting them, knowing to yourself that you really want to get rid of that piece of trash as quickly as possible, because it is a piece of trash. Cosine signing out.